I recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer.
Thank you, Chair Sherman and Ranking Member Huizenga. I am, well, let's say I was pleasantly surprised and I'm proud to see my bill, the Main Street Growth Act, noticed for this hearing. The Main Street Growth Act would allow the Securities and Exchange Commission to provide for the creation of venture exchanges so that small and medium cap companies can go public through a more streamlined process. This bill passed out of this committee unanimously in the 115th Congress, and it passed the House as well. In fact, I'd like to thank Chair Sherman, Mr. Scott, Mr. Himes, Mr. Foster, Mr. Meeks, Mr. Gottheimer, and Mr. Gonzalez on this subcommittee for voting in support of this bill, and I hope to have your support again. Look, we have a capital formation problem in this country, and ultimately, the compliance burden borne by government overregulation is making the initial public offering process unrealistic for a large segment of private American companies. This hurts everyday American investors the most, much like Mr. Pivovar and Representative Gonzalez were just talking about. Small private companies that need capital are at a disadvantage today because the trading and listing environment is geared so much for much larger IPO companies than it was 25 years ago. How do we know? The participation in the IPO process has significantly declined since the 1990s. Let's look at the facts. The number of IPOs declined more than 63% from the 1990s to the 2000s and has stayed relatively flat up to 2020. At the same time, the United States has doubled the regulatory compliance costs a business has to take on for going public in a traditional IPO. Just to give an idea, it costs an average of $2.5 million for a company to achieve just the initial regulatory compliance for going public, and then it's an additional 1.5 million on an annual basis thereafter. These are SEC estimates. In the past 2 years, we've seen a surge in companies going public through alternative strategies like SPACs, indicating that the traditional IPO process is not feasible for emerging innovative companies. The small startup IPO should not be on the superhighway designed for trading Apple and Microsoft. We need to move away from the one size fits all SEC regulatory posture and allow the market to try new innovative strategies. After all, capital formation starts when a company can list its shares on a quality electronic venue plugged into the full force of America's investment potential. I appreciate my colleagues' willingness to advance legislation that creates new exchanges tailored to small and medium cap companies because exchanges are integral in the capital formation process, and America's capital markets are the envy of the world. The broader discussion of this hearing, I worry, centers around making it harder for exchanges to operate, which could impose barriers on the new small competitors in the venture exchange space and ultimately make our capital markets less competitive and accessible. When we set up structures that allow for more companies to go public, we give the American people more access to our capital markets. We give them more opportunities to build financial wealth. Mr. Pivovar, do you believe that our legislation, the Main Street Growth Act, can eliminate some of the barriers currently deterring small emerging growth companies from going public?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, you pointed out the streamlined IPO process, and so those are for existing private companies that do want to go public. In addition, as you point out, it also addresses the fact that that the exchanges, the trading system is set up for the larger public companies, and frankly, the exchanges don't have the incentive to try to do innovative things, like you said, an experiment because of unlisted trading privileges. So in your bill, you would give exclusive trading rights to the venture exchange. Now, the commission looking at that, they're going to, it's going to be very, very look at that very, very carefully, and we need to be very careful for that. The reason for that is you want to encourage the experimentation by the exchanges to compete with one another to make the market more conducive for that. And so it is my hope that that would be the case. That you mentioned tick sizes and potentially doing call markets instead of continuous trading. But there's probably some other things the exchanges could do if they were granted that exclusivity.
Great point. And on that note, with a majority of American companies searching for alternative avenues from the traditional IPO process to form capital, such as SPACs, as I
Mm,
referred to earlier, or
mm.
simply staying private, do you believe that there is a timely need for Congress to pass this legislation?
Uh, in a word, yes. Whatever you can do at Congress and the SEC can do to encourage more companies to go public at the appropriate time. You mentioned SPACs, right? Another one is direct public listings. And those are instances where you have companies that have grown very large in the private sector. And the only reason why they're going public is to have a liquidity event. They don't even need to raise capital at that point. So the more, the better.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.